Everyone, Joe Waxman here. And in this video, I want to look at the chart of uh, Benjamin Rothschild. He's a Rothschild. Guys, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already. Let me share my screen. So I originally wanted to do Evelyn Rothschild because he just recently passed, and I thought that would be interesting. But actually, at my source of birth charts, which I'll just show you, Astro Theme. Well, they don't have everyone, and not everyone they have is accurate. They give ratings, and I try and stick to the AA reliability. So that's why I can't do some people, just because if it's not accurate, I don't want bad information, right? So I try and stick to only the accurate birth charts that they have, that they know are accurate, because otherwise it's like, then I'm trying to make sense of things that maybe are not true, and then what's the point of that? It's kind of poisoning my experience. That's the way I look at it. I don't want to look at things that may not be accurate. Only want to be accurate here. That's the whole point. All right, so Benjamin de Rothschild, and he died not too long ago, 2021. He wasn't that old, 50s, 57. All right, but let's look at his life. He's from the Rothschild family. He was a French banker, and he was one of the more wealthy ones. That's just on paper. And we don't really know. I mean, everyone says that like the Rothschilds own all the central banks. Maybe they do. I'm not saying they do, but and again, we don't know. And the reason why I put like just a small disclaimer on there about that is because there's a lot of popularly held beliefs that are just simply not true once you start digging, which I'll get into, especially around Jews. Everyone loses their mind when a Jew comes up. They just lose all logic and just start believing fantasy stuff. And you only need to start putting the facts together to realize a lot of the stuff that they say about Jews or Zionists, like the crazy word. Everyone's supposed to think Zionist means something really bad when it doesn't. It just means pro-Israel, which is, I mean, that's another story. I don't want to get into that, but it's not much different than being pro-Pakistan. Pakistan was created in 1947. It's a Muslim state. They had to get rid of all the Hindus. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. Anyway, nobody makes a fuss about Pakistan. And as well as the Khazarian mafia. There's no connect. This just a fantasy. You cannot. The Khazarians ended in 1200, which I'm going to get into actually. So, but let's look at it. He is a seventh generation descendant of the dynasty of Meir Amschel, the Rothschild. So the Rothschild family is huge. His mother was not Jewish, and this happens. This happens a lot, actually. This happened in my own family. My grandmother's Jewish. My grandfather's not Jewish, right? If you look at the old movie Fiddler on the Roof, right? One of the daughters marries a Christian, and that's very frowned upon in that family. Obviously not all of them, but so it does happen, and that's why when Jews move to different countries, usually through persecution, they have to leave because they're always being persecuted. They marry the local people, and not always, but they once in a while, like you get that, and that's why they blend in. Then they start to look different over generations. It happens, right? So he got into banking because he's a Rothschild. He worked in family-owned banks in California, returned to Europe, worked for BP in London, and then launched a Rothschild succeeded in blah, blah, blah. He restructured the blah, blah, blah. Oh, this is pretty boring. He launched Edmund de Rothschild Investment Services in Israel, and succeeded his father, helped at the Rothschild Foundation. He married, and I don't know, this is all boring. He's a banker, lots of money. Sailing. He got into sailing, like, rich people sports, buying big yachts, going really fast, vineyards and farms, inherited a wine estate, new ventures in South Africa, Argentina, vineyards in South Africa. It's whatever, lots of wines and all that, and cheese as well. Brie, we got into brie making as well, wine and cheese. And married, had 4 daughters. He was a heroin user, avid car collector, Formula One Ferraris, rich people hobbies. On the Ferrari, California. And he's very rich. And then he died of a heart attack at age 57. All right, so Rothschild family. Just a quick note on the whole Rothschild thing, because there's a lot of conspiracy theory about that and all that, relating to, some people are like, oh, they're Khazarian mafia, whatever that. Khazarian, I mean, there's no connection there. Like, I just want to point that out. Like, anytime people are like, yeah, it's the Khazarian mafia, that whole theory is so full of holes. It's barely held together by Scotch tape. It's flimsy as can be. It just doesn't hold any water. The Khazarians were a Turkic group that expanded through Europe, and they were a trade organization. They were a cognate, as it's called, a primitive group that dealt in business. And whether some of them were doing shady business deals or not, they didn't call themselves mafia. That's just came out of, modern, Jew hatred, basically, because they were a primitive group. They were not one of the Abrahamic religions. They did not follow. So they were forced to convert when they were being broken up, and some of them converted to Judaism, probably like the leadership. And then, but there was a lot of them, and they were from a lot of different areas. They weren't one united people. They were from many different countries and many different kinds of people. And so some of them became Christians, some became Jews, some became Muslim even, because they were quite broad, right? And Turkey, as we know, is a Muslim country now. But that ended in 1200 AD. And yeah, maybe there was Jews who came after that, but you got to also realize that those Jews intermarried with ethnic Jews from the past. The bloodlines mixed. A lot of Jews converted to Christianity, either secretly being Jews or fully converting to Christianity out of pressures. And not only that, a lot of Jews were murdered. Why do you think there's only 15 million Jews on the planet today, considering that Judaism is 4,000 years old, right? So a lot of Jews were either murdered throughout the years or converted to Christianity. So there's Jewish bloodline in all throughout Christianity, right? Point being that this whole thing about like, oh, the Jewish bankers of Europe are Khazarian mafia, that's not reality. That's just another way for people who hate Jews to blame the Jews, right? By saying that like European Jews aren't real Jews, they're all Khazarian mafia. That's nonsense, right? We have history, we have documents, we have written testament about the Jews, migration through Europe, and a lot of it was driven by persecution, right? The wars, various, discrimination against Jews. And mind you, it's not just against Jews. People of all kinds, different religions always hate each other. They still do. Muslims and Christians, Muslims and Hindus, Jews and Muslims, Christians and Jews, like they all hate each other. Everyone hates each other, basically, when you're talking about religion. So they're always trying to kill each other. Jews just happen to be like a, never got ahead. They were always a minority as far as numbers go, right? And culture. But the going back to the Rothschilds and the Jewish banking and trade thing. I mean, this is relevant talking about the whole, Kanye and Kyrie Irving thing, because they're saying that the Jews had an active part in the slave trade, which, there's some truth to that, but because they owned ships, because they were merchants, because in medieval Europe, Jews were not allowed to be part of Christian guilds, so they were not allowed to learn trades. This is discrimination, obviously. This is religious persecution. Jews were not allowed to own land. And to add to that, Christians were not allowed to be bankers, because this whole idea of usury, is considered bad. However, it's completely backwards, because Christians were borrowing money. They were borrowing money at an interest, obviously, because you have to, because there's no other way to borrow money. You can't borrow money without usury, so like, unless Christians want to be like, we will never borrow any money. We will never borrow any money, right? Unless they say that, then the whole thing the argument completely fails, because the only way to make lending money worthwhile is to charge interest. Otherwise, nobody would ever do it. There's actually no reason to lend somebody $1,000 only to be paid back $1,000 several years later, if at all. It's a huge risk, and then you lose money because of inflation, right? So there's no incentive at all to lend money other than that. But Jews were forced into that because they couldn't do other things. They were forced into, in Europe anyway, into banking and commerce, trade, because those were the two areas that they couldn't own land, so they couldn't become farmers, right? And they couldn't get into Christian guilds, which is how they learned trades. So the Jews were forced into commerce and banking. So that's why Jews owned ship. That's why the Jews were the money lenders, unfortunately. And then they're, discriminated against because of that. But if you want to know why the Rothschilds were bankers, that's the reason. And I'm not making an excuse for the Rothschilds. Like they took over, they became greedy, they became, evil, and it seems to be. That's the way it seems to be, right? From if I'm, if what we're being told is true, that the Rothschilds own all the central banks across Europe and America and everywhere, basically, right? That could be true. But there could be details that we don't know about that as well. But the point being is that they got their start the way the other Jewish families got their start in banking, is because there was such heavy discrimination in medieval Europe that they had to turn to banking and commerce. And I don't know when it changed, what time period, when they allowed Jews to own land again, or when Jews were allowed to be, take part in other guilds, whether they opened them up, I don't know. But I know that originally that's the way it was. And so Jews got their start in Europe in banking and commerce. And that's why the Jews owned ships. That's why they got into, shipping slaves, unfortunately. But it wasn't unique to Jews. Everyone was doing, including Jews were slaves too, right? And Jews, and then, like Christians were involved in the slave trade as well. And so were the Africans, and so were the Muslims, right? They were all involved. It wasn't like, I mean, so they color, they twist, they cherry pick the facts and the details and leave things out that are very relevant of, when they're talking about like, oh, Jews were, had most of the slave ships. Well, they were traders. They had used those ships for commerce, right? And slavery became fashion, and they could make money at it. And they, nobody had any objection to it at that time. I'm not making excuses. It's not like that's a, great thing to do, but nobody was doing any different. It's not like the Christians were doing. The Christians were just, praise Jesus, here's my slave, whatever, what I mean? They were buying and selling slaves, praising Jesus the whole time. So nobody can claim superiority in that. It's a whole ugly time period where people thought they could own one another. In any case, I'm not going to spend too long on the astrology here because his life is pretty boring. He was born rich boy and dad rich man, and he was rich and dealt with money, and yeah. So he's got a son in Leo in the fourth house, right? And fourth house deals with land, real estate, farming, politics, which he was not a politician, but also cars and yachts you would see here as well, because resources, but like physical material, right? Immaterial resources, more second house, like the value, the worth, actual physical, like land, brick and mortar buildings, cars, that sort of thing is fourth house. So Sun in Leo, fourth house, that's very prominent. It's square the ascendant. So I mean, that's okay, because it had the angles are always square or ideally square, but that's just, he's got a lot of squares and difficult aspects. So there's probably a lot of details about, I'm sure there's a lot of details about his life that are not, in the Wikipedia that I didn't bother to research, but this is pretty stubborn, this fixed square here, Taurus ascendant, Leo sun, very confident, but loves owning lands and real estate and cars and things like that, farms, winemaking, cheese making, because of the land that's required for those things. Moon in Sagittarius in the 8th house. It's very much about, banking, inheritance as well, because 8th house, other people's money, banking, inheritance, and death too, death, rebirth, crisis, things of that nature. Moon square Uranus here, that's not so good for his well-being or health. That it can indicate, to the moon, let's see, this Uranus is an accident, a planet that brings sudden events. Moon is also, or sorry, not moon, 8th house is also sudden events, so this can indicate accidents. Moon is early childhood. I don't know whether it's like relates to his early childhood, mother issues, but definitely something potentially accidental, but also very sudden. And this could be certain mental imbalances because of the square to the moon. Moon in the 8th house is not good anyway. It's bringing in that Scorpio energy, very heavy for the moon. So heroin, drugs, alcohol, things of that nature, and just accidental, I would think. Venus, this is ascendant lord. It's going right into the 4th house in Cancer. It's got a sesquisquare to Chiron, so that's not so good for his health, because Venus is the ascendant lord, so it's representing his body, and Chiron is, wounds, rejection, things of that nature. Let's see what else. South node conjunct the MC in Capricorn, 10th house. Saturn is in Aquarius. So this, even if somebody is born with money, they're still going to have things that support that, unless if it doesn't support it, things will happen. They might be born with money, then they have a falling out with the family, they get kicked out, they get robbed of their fortune or something, or they die young, or they reject their fortune. Something will happen where they're not going to be able to support that. But his career is very strong. Saturn is authority, especially in good dignity, so he has a very strong career from an early age and a lot of authority and leadership. And he took over his father's businesses, banking and wine and all that. So very strong career. Saturn and you know, Capricorn, Uranus, all that. Aquarius. It's also conjunct the 11th house cusp in Aquarius, so groups, networks, career success, things of that nature. It is the 10th whole sign house though, so still very prominent for career, right? Jupiter is square the nodes, and this is quite interesting. Jupiter is ruling the 9th cusp, but the 8th whole sign house here, and most of the 8th quadrant. So it's bringing in a lot of 8th house energy. 8th and the 12th is okay because these are both malefic houses, malefic lords and malefic houses. I mean, if you want to take Mars to be the 8th cusp ruler, which technically it is, barely 29 degrees, and Mars is not in good dignity here in Libra, but it's in the 6th house. So it's kind of mixed because Mars is not in good dignity, but 8th and 6th is also good. 8th and 12th or 8th and 6th is good because it's malefic lord in a malefic house. However, he did die young, 57, of a heart attack. So we can see that there should be, you know, something with the 6th house that is not quite good. Ascendant lord in 6th house for health, that is not very good, and that's this Mars in detriment in Libra. Right, Mars in Libra is not in good dignity here. And Mars is ruling the 7th and 8th cusp. So his wife is not in great dignity here because so there's issues with his marriage, I'm sure. Not a very positive marriage, I would think, because Mars in the 6th, it's at the loss, it's 12th from the 7th, right? Because this is the 12th from the 7th house. 1, 2, 3, you know, you always have to count like that. 1, 2, 3. So this would be the 12th. So that's not good. That's a loss of marriage, and Mars in bad dignity shows poor marriage. But Jupiter here, it's square the nodes, so that gives it special significance. And Jupiter is the planet of abundance and, you know, prosperity, benefic, generosity, and all the good things. So there's something about Jupiter in Aries that is it's dispositor is Mars. Mars is ruling the 12th and the 6th, so that's also not bad. It's not really the 12th lord, but it's most of the 12th house because 12th cusp, so Jupiter's the 12th. 12th and the 12th. Interesting. Foreign affairs, foreign issues, foreign things, secrets, isolation, creativity. He was fond of art. He bought a jet engine and made it into an art piece, or commissioned an artist to do that for him. Interestingly enough. So that's something about that there. Yeah, and a lot of foreign business, foreign wealth, foreign, you know, assets, Jupiter's, all that. They had excessive abundance and all that. Right. What else? Pluto in the 5th. I'm not sure. That would relate to his children, Pluto and Uranus together. I mean, there might have been some issues with his children. I don't know. I can't really say, but in any case, let's see, Uranus trine the ascendant. That's, you know, that's quite good for awareness, quite good for brilliance and thinking, but not that he really needed it too much, because he was a Rothschild, you know, born into the Rothschild dynasty. Neptune in Scorpio. I mean, I don't know. He probably likes to party with his friends or his partner. This is somebody who's definitely meeting people who are lying and deceiving. He might have married that his wife might have married him for money because of lies, deceit, Scorpio, other people's money. Seventh house represents partner marriage, and it did not turn out too well for him. I did not even pull up his draconic, but let's just see here real quick. Bingo, real quick. Mercury on the ascendant. That's quite good for Mercury, Uranus, Pluto. Definitely some iconic planets here that are very good for intelligence and whatnot. He was obviously capable. I mean, he didn't blow it all. He didn't waste his fortune. Even on paper, he's one of the wealthiest Rothschilds. I mean, not that wealthy compared to a lot of people today, but probably, like I said, probably the real fortune is hidden. We don't talk about that. Right? 12th house activity, foreign affairs, and creativity, isolation, things of that nature, loss. I mean, let's see, what else? Moon in Leo, here in the 4th house, more 4th house activation, Neptune in Cancer. It's all fine. I mean, I'm not really seeing much. Jupiter's in Sag here in the 9th house. I don't know, he didn't really seem very religious. It didn't say anything about it, but it didn't really say much of anything. In any case, that's it for Rothschild. I used him to talk about the Rothschild family and the whole Khazarian mafia myth. Like it's such a myth. If there was a mafia in the 1200s, or between 1000 AD and 1200, there's no evil gene. I hate to break it to everyone, but there's no evil gene that could carry over like hundreds of years. Oh, they have the evil gene. These are the evil people. It's just people want to blame the Jews. People want a scapegoat. They don't understand that the historic, they didn't research it, and they don't realize that, a lot of it was due to persecution and also epigenetics. I mean, this is a very touchy subject when we start to look at the different racial or ethnic characteristics, but different people over the years, because of epigenetics of what they do, when you do something from generation to generation to generation, epigenetics dictates that certain genes will become enhanced. So when the Jews are forced to become bankers and traders, they become good at that, right? They become good with numbers. They become good at business, right? If somebody's forced to do physical labor for generations and generations and generations, they become good at that too, right? It's touchy, but at the same time, it's worth pointing out. These are epigenetic things that happen over time. And the Jews just get good at numbers because they're forced to work with numbers, and they study the Torah, and they do banking and commerce. They get good at it, right? And unfortunately, fortunately, unfortunately, some of both. But there's no evil gene, is my point, and there's nothing connecting any modern Jew to the Khazarians. That's a myth. But prove it. Prove it once. Prove it one time only. Once. Prove it. Nobody can prove it. You can't. What are you gonna do? I mean, like, you'd have to, they could prove it, actually. They could just do genetic testing on all the Jews and be like, oh, there's a trace of Turkic blood here, which we, think that must be Khazarian, or maybe do family lineage, which would be tough to trace it all the way back. Sure, they could, but nobody's doing that, right? And how much of the Khazarians are mixed in with Christianity, because all those Jews were then forced to convert to Christianity, right? So it's like this mythology that doesn't even make sense. Like, there's the evil gene that's being passed on because the Khazarians and the Jews now have the evil gene. Well, a lot of Jewish blood is in all of Christianity. I hate to break it to you, because the Jews were forced to convert to Christianity. So now, like, what are all those the evil gene, the evil Jewish gene that was originally Khazarian is now in Christian blood? It's stupid. There's no evil gene. Like, people are not, you can't pass on this certain, and people are not evil. They just believe in evil things, and that doesn't get passed on. It's each individual has to decide whether they want to be good or evil, whether they want to follow the soul or the ego, which is that's the essential difference. That's essentially what good and evil is. I mean, good and evil is it's a shortcut for that ego versus soul, and that's individual. It's not like you can condition somebody to do that, but if it goes against their who they are and their soul, they're not going to. They'll rebel against that and be like, no, I don't want to be egotistical. I don't want to hurt people to boost my ego. I want to help people, right? Because that's an individual choice. So the whole thing is stupid. Like, and then I'm not going to get into Zionism, but that's stupid too when people use it as a derogatory term. It's just not derogatory. Oh my god. It's like meaningless when you scratch below the surface. Like, forget what everyone's telling you. What does it mean? You're for Israel. Oh, okay. Well, guess what? Jews have been living in the entire Middle East area, including Israel and Palestine, for 4,000 years. I mean, it's stupid. Stupid. There's over 50 Muslim majority countries. Nobody has a problem with that, right? They had to remove all the Hindus from Pakistan in order to make it a Muslim country in 1947. Nobody gives a damn about that. So a lot of this stuff is Jew hatred. I'm sorry, it is. It's not based in fact. It's based in superstition. If you start looking at the facts and scratch below the surface, none of it adds up. None of it makes sense. So anyways, there's that. All right, guys, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment down below, book a reading with me, macroastrology.com, that's my website. macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com is my email address, and get in touch with me. All right, thanks, bye.